This is it, the last hour. I know we've been through a lot together, but we're almost done. One more time, Anthony Riley.
A couple more standard type questions. Tides. What do you think causes them?
Well, we know it's not gravity because gravity's not a force.
That's not what
Einstein
I asked.
said it's the effect. Well, we know what's not. I think that what's causing tides is the heat in the heat of the sun. You know, do you know what the conversion? You know when they say that you can't compress a liquid, right? That's true. But if you heat a liquid, it will rise its volume. The volume will increase as a function of temperature. So although you can't squash a liquid, the volume of water will increase by 4% as a function of heat. Now that's the total volume of the water changing, but the sun only heats the surface of the water. So if the surface of the water and maybe that much below it is over the whole plane or globe, whichever, if that much of the surface of all the standing water is heated, that's going to increase its volume by 4%. Now that's not that much. When you say 4% of the surface of the water is not that much, but when you consider how much of the land is the coast, I mean, it's 70% water. Only a small portion of that is coastline. That means that you've got a very small amount of land that is going to be affected by it. We know that the heat of the sun will change the volume of water by 4% of the surface water. And then when the sun's not there, it then cools and it reduces down and it contracts because it goes back to its normal position. And then the sun comes back around and warms it back up again. I think that the tides are literally caused by the sun. The convection currents, the heat from the sun warms the water, it expands by 4%, and that is the cause of tides. I don't accept that it's got anything to do with the gravitational pull of the moon.
Wouldn't that require that the tides have some connection with the orbit of the sun, or the travel of the sun over the plane then, rather than the moon? Because it is correlated with the moon.
You believe it's correlated with the moon?
Clocks say it's correlated with the moon.
But we've got evidence that shows that we've got low tides when there's supposed to be a new moon. So at the new moon phase, when the sun and the moon come round together, if gravity is really a thing and it's caused by the moon, when the sun and the moon get in the same proximity of the sky at new moon phase, there should never be a low tide because the gravitational effect of the sun and the moon together should be pulling all of that water towards you, and it should be a high tide always. Whilst they're in the sky together.
But the daily change of the tides directly correlates with the location of the moon over the Earth. Regardless of the sun, if you took the sun out of the picture, the tides...
Okay, so you've just totally dismissed the point. You've totally dismissed the point I've just made.
But your point doesn't negate that fact.
Yeah, it does. Because if what you've just said was true, then when you have new moon phase and the moon and the sun passing each other, whether it's an eclipse or not is irrelevant. But my point is, when they're in the sky together, that should be the point where the gravitational pull of the moon and the sun together combined has to give a high tide at that point. But it doesn't give a high tide. We get low tides at that point, and that's impossible. So it's not being caused by the moon.
Then I would say
not even correlated.
Then it's not correlated with the sun either, because there is no timing connection between high tides and the sun's position.
Maybe, but the question that you asked was, what do you think causes tides?
Yes.
And my answer is, it's the sun. I don't know how it's doing it, but what I realize is that it's not the moon that's doing it, because we can have a high tide at new moon phase, which is impossible if it's caused by the moon.
Okay.
It must be, we can have a low tide at new moon phase, which is impossible if it's caused by the moon, because it would negate that you would only ever have a high tide. But we can have a low tide. So it can't be caused by the moon.
So it's caused by the sun, but not necessarily directly correlated with the location of the sun at that time.
Yeah, because the sun spends some of its time going over the northern hemisphere, where it's going mainly over land, and then the other time it's going over the southern hemisphere, because of 12 hours later it's going around the other side, where it's going directly over all the water. But that's basically heating the land, no effect on the water. Heating the water, big effect. Heating the land again, no effect on the water. Heating the water again, big effect on the water.
Okay.
It depends on the orientation of all the land masses, and whether that map behind you over your head is correct or not, or whether it's the globe. Because on both models, the sun's warming the land half the time and warming the water for the other half of the time. But it's the layout of the land that would probably tell us the shape of the layout of the layout of the land masses. Because when the sun's warming the land masses and it's over, say, like the hot regions like Saudi Arabia and Kenya and all them, it's not warming directly the water there, because the land's getting that water, that heat. But when it's over the southern Pacific, like the next time, 6 months later, when it's warming the lower parts and it's the southern Pacific that's getting the bulk of the heat, that's when the land's not getting it. So for me, it's to do with the sun warming the water more than it is anything else. And because I accept that we can have a low tide at new moon phase when we should never get a low tide at new moon phase on a sphere model.
Okay. Might be a weird question. I don't know your position on this. Do you believe atoms are real?
Basically, nobody's ever seen an atom. They believe that they exist. This is the problem. This is my biggest problem with quantum mechanics, because on the one hand, I've got John from Quantum Eraser channel telling me that quantum mechanics is the only thing, and I agree with that. It makes sense. But it relies on the empirical evidence to prove that atoms, protons, photons, electrons actually exist. And I don't believe that there is any evidence that shows that atoms and photons and electrons even exist. Because what's light? Is light a particle or is it a wave? Well, they say that light is a particle. It's not a wave. Okay, so if it's a particle, that means it must have mass. No, it's massless. Well, how can you have a particle that's massless? Well, it just is. Okay, so you've got a massless particle. So when the photons go into your eye, do you have like photon shells gathering at the bottom of your eye, because the particles that have got no mass, they've got to go somewhere, right? They're physical. It doesn't work like that. You're being silly. So back to your question. Well, do you believe that atoms exist? I don't know. My comprehension.
Have you ever heard of a cloud chamber? Seriously, after this, look it up. It's some of the most amazing videos I've ever seen. Basically, what it is you get a small aquarium, put a layer below it of dry ice. On the edges, 3 edges of the aquarium, lined with black felt. Put lights on the bottom so that you can see through the bottom. And then on the top of the aquarium, you put a layer of felt and you saturate it with alcohol. The alcohol will like mist down as it sublimates into gas, and then as it gets to the bottom, it refreezes and it creates literally a cloud layer. And as subatomic particles pass through the cloud, you don't see the particle, but you see the effects of the particle on the cloud. So you can see little zips of lines of particles coming through. And you can buy radioactive elements scarily on Amazon, like radioactive carbon. It's on the tip of a needle. And you can put the tip of the needle up to that box, and you can see all of the lines coming off of it that are the radiation coming off of it as it's decaying. It's really impressive. It's one of the projects I'd really like to build.
Now, the problem is there. You're seeing something. See, I think that our vision is, like we only see in certain spectrums of colors, and the spectrum, we only see a certain part. We can't see infrared. We can't see radioactive radiation. There's a spectrum of stuff that we can't see. There are some cameras that allow you to see some parts, but I think that there is the world that exists beyond our own visual ability to see, that is just on a different frequency. And if I was a Superman, if I had a superpower, I would want to be able to control the spectrum of frequency of light that I can see. So in other words, I could have different modes in my vision, so I could see human vision, then I could see X-ray vision, then I could see infrared, and then go through all of the spectrums, and I could just flick, and you'd see a totally different world. And I think that the stuff in the visual world that exists that we can't see because we can't detect the frequencies with our eyes, but if we had the ability to perceive the frequencies that we can't perceive, we would see a totally different world, and everything would become obvious to us. And it's effectively it's almost by design that we can't see the stuff that we really, really, really want to see. If we could see the stuff that we really, really, really want to see, it would make everything perfect. But it's almost as if somebody's put a block on it so that you can't see between these frequencies for whatever reason. And in them frequencies are the answers to all the questions that we want to know. And it's just almost ironic that, or coincidental, that we can't see the frequencies that are necessary to give us the answers that we want to know. And we have to assume that when we see particles, we're not really seeing the particles, but we're seeing the effects of the particles in the explanation that you just gave. That leads us to believe that they must be there because we see the effects of them. And it's like, then you kind of go in on a faith thing, because it's like, yeah, I accept that there's the effect there.
There's something
but
there.
Does it mean that there is? Yeah, but what is it? Is it? There may be something, and there is something there, but it's like you're literally having to accept that something that you can't see, smell, touch, perceive at all, but you've seen the effects of it. it's faith, isn't it? Where do you draw the line between faith and empiricism?
I wouldn't say necessarily that it's well, and where you again where you draw the line, because there is something there. Because if you put an actual like chunk of something radioactive, I've seen videos of actual uranium in there, not uranium that would hurt you because it was a low grade uranium, but I'm sure if you put like high grade, seriously radioactive uranium in there, it would be massive. You would see the cloud coming off of it, and it would probably burn your hand. It would be hot, and it would probably give you radiation poisoning, which
But
confirms that there
again,
is something there.
yeah, I agree there might be
Yeah.
something there, but it's like if you're accepting the fact that there must be something there, but you can't demonstrate that there is something there, you are literally crossing the boundary between lacking empiricism and going into faith. Now, it's not blind faith; it's supported faith because you can see something happening. You can't see what is happening, so it's like, do you accept that there is something happening, therefore photons must exist, or do you accept that something's happening, but you shouldn't assume that they are particles or photons or electrons or whatever, because you just can't accept that. I mean, again, it's like you say, where is it drawn the line? Is it between empiricism or what you can prove, or is it inferred logic based on what you believe must be happening because you can see an interaction, but you just can't prove what's causing it because you can't see it? It's not there.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
All right. Last two general flat Earth questions, and I've got some personal questions for if you're willing to entertain them. Two questions I ask everybody, and I'm pretty sure I already know the answers to this. What do you think is the strongest proof for the flat Earth model? And I know we spent
Um, see,
a lot of time
not
on
being forced.
gas
Yeah.
pressure, gravity force, stuff like that.
I mean, the biggest proof that we're not on a sphere is that you look into the night sky, you see the stars. We're told that they're in the vacuum of space, but we're breathing gas pressure. Gas pressure can't exist next to a vacuum without some kind of membrane. We're seeing stars. I mean, that for me is the biggest proof that we're not living on a sphere. Does it mean that we're living on a flat plane? No. Does it mean that something else is going on? Absolutely. Because you can't have gas pressure next to a massive differential of 10 to the minus 17 torr without some kind of membrane. We know that gravity is not a force pulling it back. So, well, what is it then? Why are we breathing this stuff and it's defying the laws of the second law of thermodynamics? And the answer is, I don't know. But what I do realize is that there is a massive problem with the empirical evidence to demonstrate how we've got gas pressure when Einstein says it's not a force. So it's like the stars in the southern sky. That's the biggest proof that we're not on a sphere. What's the biggest proof that it's flat? We see too far. Does that make it flat? No. But flat is a sense that we perceive through vision. There's no measurable curvature. There's measurable contour, like relief, like mountains and dips for reservoirs and lakes and stuff. But does that make it flat? No, there is no curve. There is no measurements for flat either. So what is the best proof that we've got that it's flat? The answer is it's inferred by the fact that we can see too far. It's not demonstrable any more or any less than it is measured curved either. We haven't got any curved measurements.
And then you kind of already answered it, but the next question then is, what do you think is the strongest evidence for a globe? And even if it's not evidence, possible evidence. We discussed the southern star trails, if we can prove that. Or is there anything else something that just makes you go,
The thing that makes me go is because I've got a P900 and I've gone out and I've done my own research. There's been days when I've come back and I've thought, holy fuck, it's a ball, because there are times it doesn't look like a ball. There's other times when I come back and I thought it's flat. And what I realised is that on any given day, at any given time, if you happen to go in the conditions that are suited more to flat, then you're going to see a flat plane. If you go to that same viewing point on a different day with different conditions, it's going to appear bally. And it's 50-50. There's most of the time it appears to be, well, that's not consistent with a ball. Doesn't prove ball, doesn't prove flat, but it's not consistent with the spherical geometry. But most of the time, sometimes you get the extreme opposites on both sides. Sometimes you get it flat as a pancake. Sometimes you get it bendy. And my view on the empirical evidence, the empirical observations that we can do, is that it can prove both either way, depending on what mood you're in, depending on the conditions and how you interpret what you're looking at. But what's the biggest proof that it's a sphere? Let me have a think.
Say that Ranty said the Southern Stars. Mark Sargent said the Southern Stars. Nathan Roberts said nothing. The Bible proves it's flat.
Nathan Roberts or Nathan Thompson?
Roberts.
I'm not familiar with Nathan Roberts. The Southern Stars to me can be interpreted like the blades on a Chinook. You're lying on your back and you're looking at the blades of the Chinook spinning above your head. It doesn't prove that it's a sphere to me at all. It doesn't even indicate it. What would indicate it would be looking in the same direction, seeing the blades spinning, the rotation point. That would be a proof that it's a sphere. But in itself, the rotation point, I mean, look, you can have, like I say, you can have a helicopter spinning its blades on one side of you over that way, and then you've got the other side of you going that way, where you've got another helicopter spinning its blades. But that doesn't prove anything to do with the shape of the Earth. It's just two blades spinning in the same way that there could be two stars rotating around two vortexes in the sky that are intentionally created to prove that it's creation. I'm not swayed by the stars proving anything at this point because there just isn't enough information for me to make the conclusion that the stars prove anything to do with the shape of the Earth. It's more to do with how the sky works, to be honest with you. But the biggest proof that we live on a sphere.
Or not even necessarily a proof, but just something that makes you question.
And I need time to think about this. You might have to press pause on the recording. Let me come back to that.
Okay,
I'll
yeah,
think
that's fine.
of something.
That's fine. And if you don't have anything off the top of your head, that's absolutely fine. So I've got some other more personal questions, not necessarily directly related to Flat Earth, but one of them is,
Sure.
Do you watch the Globe supporters' videos? What was that?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody specifically that you watch?
Well, I don't want to glorify them, but anybody that makes a claim, anybody that does an observation, I don't want to name drop them because I don't want them to know that I watch their work. But there was one guy that made a GoFundMe and he wanted to demonstrate that he wanted to demonstrate that the Earth was curved. I'll have to say his name, otherwise you won't know what I'm talking about. It's Sly Sparkane.
Yeah.
He got $3,000 and he said that he was going to connect a load of pipes with a load of verticals. Yeah. And he was going to fill it up with water and he was going to measure the curvature of the Earth. Now, what's interesting about that observation or that test or whatever you want to call it is that his interpretation of the results that he got were, his interpretation was, and I quote, it was inconclusive, but it leaned more towards sphere Earth. Now, my interpretation of that is that you failed to prove sphere Earth because it's either a sphere or it's not. And he failed to prove sphere because it didn't do what he expected it to do. Now, he said, well, that was because it was leaking on the joints and the blah-de-blah-de-blah. And I asked him, is he going to do it again? And he said he's going to do it again. He's going to make the joints more secure. He's going to put sealants around them so that they don't leak and all that. But he hasn't actually done it yet. Now, I get that it's going to take him time to go back and do it. But the point is that he tried to prove that the Earth had sphericity to it and failed. His interpretation was that it was inconclusive but leaned towards sphere. My interpretation is that you failed to prove sphere. So when you have a ball earther that fails to prove the point that he believed he would prove and doesn't conclude that it was a failure, he concludes that it was a 50-50 and it was leaning more towards globe. That's really interesting from my perspective because it shows the bias of the observer. And if I was to do the same test with the same pipe work that he got, I would expect it to be basically flat. Now, if I didn't get it to be flat, I'd be like, shit, what's going on here? Because I would want to know, because I agree with his idea that the pipe's sticking up and they'd all form that same level. I think all of us would agree with that. It would do that. But when he did it and it didn't do what he expected it to do, the only honest answer that you can really give is, I don't know what happened. It didn't do what I wanted it to do or what I thought it'd do. And I don't know why it didn't, but it didn't do it. That's the honest answer. But his answer was, it was inconclusive, but leaning more towards globe. No, it was a fail. But yeah, I do watch the ones that make videos trying to prove something because they're the ones that I'm more interested in. I'm not really interested in the ones where they just talk about the official rhetoric. Because, like, for example, Sean G, he'll argue all day that gravity is a force. And I'm like, Einstein debunked you. And he says, yeah, but I don't accept Einstein because I don't really understand how it all works. And I'm like, so you can't really argue that gravity is a force when the current science is Einstein and you admit that you don't understand it. Come on, you've got to be honest and say, I don't understand Einstein. I'm not going to get involved in the argument for gravitation if you don't realize that the current science is Einstein. Because if you don't know anything about the current science, then you're arguing a position that's been superseded, even though you call it refined. It's not. It's been superseded. And the reality is, you shouldn't be arguing that it's a force. You should be arguing within the construct of Einstein, the mathematical construct that is the bending of space-time. And if we're having a conversation about gravity, they're the phrases that should be coming out your face, out your head. But if you're talking about it in the sense of mass attractive mass, like you were doing earlier on with Cavendish, immediately I'd say you're not up to speed. You're behind. You've got up to 19. You've got up to the start of the First World War. That's where you're at with your science. Because the current science is Einstein, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, whether you dismiss it or not. That's the conversation about gravity that we need to be having. And I don't even want to have that conversation. But I realise that when I watch the ballers talking, it's brainwashed and they can't think, because when I get them one-to-one and I ask them, when you look at the stars and you see that that's in the vacuum of space and we're told that the gas pressure fills the available volume, you conceded it yourself earlier on in the hangout. You said if it got bigger and doubled the volume, then the pressure would halve. And I said, yeah, push that further, and it would basically it would be nothing. You'd end up with nothing if it was the infinite vacuum of space. And you were like, yeah, you kind of just debunked my thought process. When you get them one-to-one, they will have that conversation with you, and they will be made to think. But when they're in an audience, they've got that pack mentality of wolves, where they will go for the kill and they will react irrationally in the same way that if you're having a religious discussion with somebody on the blue team, it's going to get violent, and it's going to get violent quick, because you're challenging their mental state and their ability to comprehend what they're arguing, and people don't like being challenged.
And so that's kind of the exact reason that I don't want to do these interviews live, because I don't want any influence from the outside, side chat, people commenting, anyone else, because of that pack mentality. It's just you and it's just me talking.
And that pack mentality is what Nathan's chat is suffering from in one sense, in the same way that Jose's chat is suffering from in another sense. And that's why when somebody joined the other day, and I think it was Dawn Treader. I can't remember. Yeah, I think it was Dawn Treader UK joined. And I asked him, I said, how can you reason with the gas pressure point yourself in your own mind when you know that it's going to fill the available volume? That's what's going to happen. We can demonstrate it. Balloons don't burst slowly. They burn fast. They burst fast. So how do you get past that in your head? And when you start talking to him as a person, you get to a point where he goes, yeah, I see a point. And I'm like, I'm not saying that proves flat. What I'm saying is, if you can think laterally like that and you realize that there is an issue there, the only interpretation that you can take from that is, I don't know, because I don't know. I'm not saying that it's flat all round as a result of it, but what I realize is that they tell us that we're in an open system because rockets can go to the moon, but we also get told that gas pressure can exist in an open system with gravity. But Einstein says gravity is not a force. There is a conflict there. And then when we talk about the southern stars, and we see that there is no evidence that proves that two observers looking south at the same time see the same stars, and even without doing the test, we know that doesn't happen because of declination on the compass. They tell us that the compass is not looking south or north, and then you deduce from it south. So we know that doesn't happen. But they're two big pieces of evidence that's necessary. And really, when you get them one-to-one, they can at least see that that's a contradiction, right? Whether they accept it or not is a different point, but they at least realize one-to-one that that's a contradiction. But when you get them in a group, they don't do that. They just deny. And it's probably the same on both sides, to be honest. But if you can have the conversation without the audience initially, then you know that you're having a conversation with that person, and you see the real beliefs, the real views, the real evidences that they accept, or the evidences that are weak that they accept. And that's why talking to somebody that's got an element of legal practice or experience like yourself, when I point out to you certain things need to be there, all points of your claim must be demonstrated. You at least understand that terminology. And if you can't prove something that's true, then your case isn't going to be successful. You've got to prove all points of your claim. Well, that's required for the stars in the south. It's required for the gas pressure in the vacuum of space. It's required for gravity. None of this is proven, right? But it's just accepted as rhetoric and narrative. That's the accepted position. But when you try and look in the real world application of this evidence, we have problems.
Yeah. You mentioned Nathan's chat, and that's actually one of the things I was going to ask you about. What are your thoughts on the format that he uses? Because I'll be honest, it's very abrasive. And I don't know if you think is it productive the way he does it?
I'm a big critic of Nathan offline, because I say to Nathan that he should not be harsh all the time unless he's got people like the Rumpus and Dawn Treader, because they, as far as I'm concerned, the Rumpus, Dawn Treader, these are not normies. These are not normal people. These are people that are intentionally going in there to obfuscate and conflate terms and cause confusion. They want people to be confused about gravity, right? If you get the likes of yourself, a normal dude that's in there talking, he absolutely shouldn't come across as an arsehole, but he does. And the other side to it is that, well, he's providing a service and the audience likes seeing someone getting belittled and all that. So there's an element of showmanship, and I understand that. But I think when you get a normal normie, you should have a conversation with them, and he should be smarmy, patronizing, condescending, but polite. That's the way you should do it. But that's my interpretation. That's my own view on it. He knows my view, and I think that he's overly harsh and he creates a hostile environment pretty much immediately. I don't agree with that. I would rather have the conversation and get closure on points than hearing him belittle somebody because they're a moron. I don't like that. I'd rather have somebody get forced into a point where they're in a paradox and forced to accept that perhaps there is a contradiction there, and then they might. And if they won't do that, then lose your temper with them. But at least have the conversation where you have the back and forth. But it requires a skill of discussion that's not debate. It's appeasing to the human side. And there's not a lot of real humans in this discussion. A lot of the people are controlled opposition. They're not real people. These are people that hide behind keyboards, that don't show the face, that don't. You'll never see the likes of Mark Taylor on a camera. He's a troll. He knows he's a troll. Everybody knows he's a troll. But he's one of the people that's there all the time, every day, arguing that it's a ball, deny, and people see that. So Nathan he's quick to judge people as troll, and really he should be more human and say, come on. And if he was more like that, I would be a lot more supportive of his style. But I accept that his style's heavy-handed. It's not ideal. It's not good. But on the other hand, we have got the balancing factor of Matt Sargent. He's very affable, and you can't really not like Mark Sargent, even if you think he's a bit of a dork, or you think he's done this, or he's a shill, or an agent. If you have a conversation with Mark Sargent, you can't help but like the guy. Yeah, he's a nice guy.
After I interviewed him, you can't believe how many comments I got. God damn it! Now I kind of like him.
Yeah. You can't not like Mark Sargent, but it's really easy not to like Nathan because Nathan just goes at it with the "I'm going to shoot you straight away" approach, whereas Mark Sargent would never do that. He's not like that, but and then I guess you've got
the other side of chalk and cheese. Yeah, the other side of the Nathan coin though is if he didn't do that, would his channel be as successful as it is?
Well,
and it also depends on is that the audience he wants.
Yeah, he's got his own style, hasn't he? And whether his style's good, bad, or otherwise, he's got his style and he's made that show his own. And obviously, you've got to appreciate that he's done it and he's doing it and he's doing well at it. And I mean, it's just a preference thing, isn't it? Do I like the way he does it? No, not really. I'd much rather it be more humane, more discussion based. But when you get 4, 5, 6 flat earthers on a panel, and then you get somebody that joins that's on the ball side, immediately I want to take a piece out of them because I want to hear how they explain gravity. I want to hear what they. I mean, ballers can't describe gravity. They can't define gravity consistently because the current definition of gravity is the effect of the curvature of space-time. But every baller that joins think that it's mass attracting mass, but that's not the current science. And I'm like, well, if you're going to say that and like as your opening statement for what gravity is, immediately my heckles are up because I just want to attack because it's just not the current science position. That's why I attacked you, because Cavendish is not the current science. Now, even if you prove in scientific method that mass attracts mass, I would then say, well, you've still got to debunk Einstein because that's not what you're demonstrating in scientific method. That's not really scientific method, but we can say it is for the discussion. You're demonstrating the opposing position to Einstein. Now, whether you're right or not isn't the point. The point is that you're going directly against Einstein when you're trying the Cavendish experiments, but you don't necessarily realize it because it's not been pointed out to you before that mass is not attracting mass as per Einstein, and Einstein's the current science.
Next question. Almost done. Yeah, because we're at 2:40. Wow. Thank you for sticking around this long. Seriously.
Yeah.
As my dog is trying to get my attention. Why don't you monetize your account?
I think that, well, one, I don't need. See, I'm in a paradox because I don't need the money for it. And I think that it dilutes your arguments if you do monetize it because people immediately say you're only here for the money. Well, if I deliberately don't monetize it, then I'm not here for the money. So nobody can accuse me of being in it for the money because I'm not in it for the money. But that has an adverse effect because it means that I'm limited by, because if I don't feel as though I'm getting paid for my time, I don't want to spend too much time on it because it's fruitless.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants paying for the time, and so even if it's just a couple of quid, even like $2 or $3, do you know what I mean? It's like something for your time. You don't want to feel like you're wasting your time on something that's fruitless. And some people would say that it's the mentality of what you're getting out of it. It's the reward. Other people would say you want something for the fact that you're using your microphone and your electricity, and you want to pay something towards your expenditure. And I agree with that too. So on the one hand, I don't monetize my account because I feel it dilutes my neutral position if I do. But on the other hand, I realize that if I don't monetize my account, then I'm actually kind of getting nothing back for the time that I do spend in it. And it puts me off spending any time in it because why would you want to spend time in a topic that I realize is not the way we're being told, but I'm not getting anything out of it? And ballers apply, deny. So on the one hand, I don't monetize my account because I perceive that ballers think that it dilutes my position of sincerity. But on the other hand, from the flat Earth perspective, I also don't want to put too much time into it because why? Why would you if you're not getting something out of it?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Last two questions. These might be a little personal. Just let me know if you don't want to talk about it, but kind of a chance to air out some information. A couple months ago, there was something going around on our side that there was an issue with your proposed thesis. Is that true? Was there some problem with the university not wanting to accept your thesis proposal?
So when you say the issue, do you know what the issue is, or is it
No,
just a generic issue?
That's kind of well, from what I was hearing is that the university declined your proposal for what your thesis was going to be.
That's true.
Okay.
They don't want me to do this.
Okay.
They've also since then they've told me that they think that it will actually fail because they say that it is basically conspiratorial. They didn't use their words, but they said that it's not a topic that the law would really get involved in. And my answer was, well, the law governs everything, does it not? Does it discriminate against certain topics in favor of other topics, or does it apply omnipotently against everything? And the answer, of course, is it applies omnipotently against everything. Nobody is above the law. No topic is above the law. It applies. But they don't want me to do it, and they've told me that they won't support me, and they have not supported me throughout this thesis, and they will not give me any support, empirical or otherwise. They will not review my work. They will not do anything. I am literally renegade, and if it fails, it fails. And they've told me that they won't support me. So on the one hand, it may fail on its merits. On the other hand, it may fail because the format is wrong, or because they've not given me what I need to know to be able to not make it right, to make it right and not be wrong. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There's been two major issues. But they don't want me to do it where the question in the education system, because that's the system that they're teaching me. And they've told me that they won't support me. So yeah, you're right. There is an issue, and there has been from day one. And they don't want me to do it, and they've told me that they will not support me, and I have to do this renegade.
So then, two quick questions on that. What is your master's in specifically?
Legal research, law.
Okay. And then what is the specifics of the thesis?
That heliocentrism is being taught in schools as a passive form of indoctrination, and it conflicts with Section 406 and 407 of the Education Act of 1996. And by virtue of that fact, it should be banned.
Okay.
Because basically, indoctrination is defined as being one-sided. It says political and partisan political, but basically, in a nutshell, it says that there's no topic in the national curriculum that should be taught as partisan, and partisan simply means one-sided. It doesn't mean political. It doesn't mean there's no politics behind it. It's literally partisan means one-sided, and if it's partisan, it should not be taught in the system. It needs to be promoted. And now my argument is that it is partisan because we're not being taught that there are electric universe guys, that there are geocentric guys, there are creationists. We're taught heliocentric sun, 93 million miles, and there's no other alternatives in the national curriculum, which is true. So it is partisan. The question is it being promoted? And by virtue of the globe being in every classroom, you've got one over your shoulder. That's kind of promotion continuously because it's conditioning, it's reinforcement of the stimulus that is the globe. You can't have a conversation about geocentrism in the classroom because there is no national. The teachers aren't taught about why geocentrism is not right because Aristotle basically didn't know that Venus and Mercury transited the sun. That means that they're on the inside of the ring on the heliocentric model, right? So that replaces Aristotle's position of geocentrism. But the electric universe guys explain how the Earth can have a molten iron core, which the heliocentric model can't demonstrate because you can't have a molten iron core unless there's energy going into it because it can't be self-perpetuating. The dynamo theory relies on an increase in energy going in, so a decrease in entropy, and that's not there on the heliocentric model. But if that's not pointed out to you as a criticism of the heliocentric model, then there's no debate, and you have a partisan promotion of one particular viewpoint, and that would be illegal under the UK law. So it's complicated in the sense that it's very simple, but it's very convoluted. So my view on it is this should be presented because it does raise the question of, well, is there alternatives and why aren't they being discussed? Because I'm 39 and I realize that we look up at the stars and we have gas pressure and we can't do that. It's a paradox. And we're not told that in school. We're just told, you know the narratives that we're told. So it's like now at the age of 39, I'm actually re-questioning it. And I'm not saying it's flat. It could be the size of Jupiter. It's just a bigger ball, right? I'm not saying it's definitely flat, but what I do realize is that there are contradictions that need to be addressed with science and evidence to prove the points that are in conflict. And the gas pressure one is really the biggest one. And I've forgotten your question now. I've gone on a tangent, but
yeah, that's all right. Just what the thesis paper specifically was. I think you provided a very thorough description of what this paper is designed to discuss. How long or when is that due? What's the timeline?
It's going to be getting submitted at some point this week. Goes in this week.
Are you done?
Pretty much.
Yeah. Well,
I've got to final some parts of it, but yeah, I keep reading it, and I have to balance I'm kind of going at a 50-50 rate. I've got a 50-50. I've got 50% law, 50%. These are the contradictions in the science that allow the law to question the science. Mm-hmm. So you could argue I've got to balance that 50-50, but it might be wrongly weighted. It might be maybe it should be 70 and 30, 70% law, 30% contradiction, or it may be 70% contradiction and just 30% law. So I'm going with 50-50 because they're not giving me the support that I need to be able to get the weighting correct, and I don't know what the weighting should be, but I'm having to do it on my own. So yeah, it's all to do with whether or not the Education Act 1996 sections 406 and 407 make the heliocentric model taught in science, in physics. Is that indoctrination through the back door, and is it illegal, and should it be banned? Because there is no expressed views of the alternatives. There's no other models discussed. Creation is a clear contender for an alternative explanation for why we're here. The heliocentric model is just a model, a reification of talking about it all the time. Are these points illegal in law? Forget about whether they're true in science. Are they illegal in law? And when you said the word semantic a few times, but my view is it's the semantic arguments that define whether or not we're correct or not. And the meanings of words are important. And if the law states that you shouldn't be taught partisan political views or promoted partisan political views, then you shouldn't be getting taught heliocentrism in school. That's literally the position. Whether or not I pass it or not is kind of irrelevant, because on the one hand, I mean, it was GoFunded me. It was crowdsourced, crowdfunded. So I've not risked any of my own money, but that's allowed me to basically assert my prowess over this and say, I don't have to do what you tell me. I'm doing what I want to do. And this is the chosen topic of my choice. This is what I want to write about. So I've had that freedom to be able to do that, because I wouldn't have done that if I'd have paid for it myself. It wasn't that much money. It was a top up from my postgrad. So I already had the credits towards the masters anyway. But yeah, by not having to pay for it myself means that I have the freedom to be able to express my desire to write about a topic of my choice, which is what they tell me I could do. And this is what I've chosen to do. And this is what I am doing. So.
Okay. So one last question before we give you a minute to kind of say your parting words. If I had a triangle with sides of 1, 1, and 1, what would the interior angles be?
Okay, so obviously you're referencing that particular, right? So that conversation that took place, I was actually eating my tea. If you listen carefully, you can hear the knives and forks clinking in the background. And I wasn't really concentrating on that conversation at the time. I was eating my tea. It was chicken stir fry. And that conversation was in the context of stellar parallax and triangulation of stars to show that stellar parallax doesn't occur. So if we have a star and we'll say it's Sirius and it's, say, is it 5.7 light years away, and then we have right next to it in the night sky, we have Betelgeuse that's 460 light years away, it gives a ratio of about 1 to 80. For every one movement of Sirius, Betelgeuse will move 80 times. and that is a parallax, right? But we don't observe it real world. So when this guy asked me if we have a triangle of sides 1, 1, and 1, I'm not thinking of answering the question. I'm thinking, why the fuck are you asking me about an equilateral triangle when we're having a detailed, deep conversation about right angle triangles? He's asking me a question that is basically red herring. So don't misconceive the perception that I'm delaying answering the question as a weakness. I'm wondering why he's going down this line of reasoning whilst I'm eating my tea. And if you listen, you can hear my knife and fork clinking in the background, so you can tell I'm eating my tea. Now, I start to wonder why he's doing this, and I'm wondering, has he got a gotcha here? So I'm beginning to get suspicious. So once I finished eating my tea, I'm like, I'm not sure I even believe you here. So I'm challenging it. Now, I'm not challenging. I know the internal sides of a triangle, but in the context of stellar parallax, where right angle triangles we're talking about, we shouldn't be having a conversation about an equilateral triangle because it's completely red herring. So all that's happened there is they've twisted the interpretation of what was that snippet, and they've taken it's been quote mined out of context, because that conversation was about right angle triangles in the context of stellar parallax, and equilateral triangles have got absolutely no application whatsoever. And all it's done is try to make me into something that isn't a fair reflection of what was actually being discussed at the time. Now, what that actually demonstrates is dishonesty on the part of the people that are twisting it. The reality is there is no application for equilateral triangles in stellar parallax. But if you want to take that in isolation, yeah, you can use that and say that this guy's a moron. But the reality is the context is stellar parallax, right angle triangles, and a lack of stellar parallax, which in itself, if when you said before about the stars, and you started to think, well, maybe the stars is the reason why it is there is. Look at Sirius in relation to Betelgeuse. They're next to each other in the night sky. One's 460 light years away, I think it is, or 560 light years away, or whatever it is, and the other one's only 5 light years away. That creates a parallax. That has to be there, and we don't observe it real world. Like Coriolis, we don't observe Coriolis force real world in relation to the Earth. So it's like that's missing evidence that needs to be there because there has to be stellar parallax.
So I'll just say that I think that the proper answer to my question would have been to laugh and call me an asshole.
Well, it's based on a misrepresentation of a point that was not being made at the time. So it's more to do with an ignorance on your part rather than realizing that.
I knew it.
Quote mine.
I've heard your explanation, so I've heard what you said before. I was just looking at you for you to snicker at me and call me an asshole.
Yeah, I don't mind. Listen, I understand that they'll take one line out of a deep conversation and they'll just twist it and base it out. But if you listen to the whole conversation about stellar parallax, I mean, you can't get around the fact that Betelgeuse and Sirius have got to parallax, stellar parallax in real world, and it doesn't happen. So when you sideball me with like equilateral triangles, and I'm like, what's that got to do with anything? The answer, of course, is it has nothing to do with it, and that's why I'm hesitant. And then I started getting paranoid, and I'm thinking, what's he getting at here? So it's an off-topic conversation.
Yeah. So then, before we sign off, is there anything you want to plug, your channel, anything you've got coming up, anything specific you want to talk about?
Not really. I mean, the conversation for me has not really changed in the last 3 years. We're still looking for evidence of curve. We're still looking for evidence of axial rotation. We're still looking for evidence of gravity, and we don't have this evidence, and we need it. So I think we need to collaborate with the stars and see what we can see when we look south.
Definitely.
Because unless we can have a conversation, unless we have that evidence to prove something, then it's conjecture. Yeah, we accept that this is what it should appear like on a sphere model, but does it do it real world? And it's the application real world that is where we need to find the answers. Because if it was the case, it would be all over the place that you could look south at the same time as the other observer. But don't forget, south is not at the horizon. On if you're in the southern hemisphere, south is through the floor. It's underneath your ass, right? So that's the thing that we need to remember. But that is the thing that we need. Ballers need. Well, ball earthers and flat earthers need that evidence to be able to have any conversation about the stars. Without that evidence, it's all conjecture.
Yeah. All right. And I'm serious. I want to try and make that happen.
Cool. I'll help you. I'll get Yuru on it. If you can get somebody else in, like maybe what's his name, Wolfie maybe, or whatever.
Or where's Wally? Yeah.
Because that's the only way we're gonna get that information.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for giving me your time. Thank you for anybody who has hung around for 3 hours listening to our ramblings. I hope that we learned a little bit about Anthony to know who he is as a person. Thank you for spending the time with me.
Gravity is not a force. Stop claiming it as a force.
After the interview, Anthony and I continued to talk via Skype. He continued to try and convince me that Einstein replaced Newton, that mass didn't attract mass, that it was a warping of space-time, and yada 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 yada. And then yesterday, there was the FE Core fiasco, where the board members of FE Core illegally used the YouTube copyright system and blocked numerous accounts on the Globe Earth side. Not because they were using their personal copyright, but because they were butthurt. So I reached out to Anthony because this is something that I couldn't tolerate. Honestly, man, I enjoy chatting with you and trying to challenge each of the other's beliefs. But if you are involved in the unethical behavior of FE Core, then we have nothing more to talk about. I'll associate with someone I disagree with, but not someone that's involved in a blatant, unethical, and fraudulent behavior claiming other people's content is their own. And how did Anthony reply? He didn't rebut. He didn't defend. He didn't deny. That's the flat earth for you, right there.